Rain had begun its soft assault upon the city long before the carriages reached Grosvenor Square, and by the time Lady Marian Elwood stepped through the glittering threshold of the winter assembly, her gown bore the faintest kiss of dampness along the hem. Candlelight fractured across 1,000 crystal edges, casting brilliance upon dancers who moved with effortless gaiety, untouched by the storms that troubled less fortunate hearts. She paused at the entrance, drawing a steadying breath, though her pulse betrayed her with a tremble. The room shifted, ever so subtly, as though society itself leaned nearer to inspect her solitary arrival. Whispers bloomed like frost upon glass. Some tilted their fans. Others merely lifted their brows in sympathetic cruelty. They spoke of her absence from recent gatherings, of her husband's temper, of the unspoken failures that shadowed their union. It had been 2 years since her marriage to the Duke of Harrowmere, and in that time, they had perfected the art of silence. Separate rooms, separate mornings, separate lives sewn together only by duty's thin thread. Lady Marian moved forward with quiet dignity, though her cheeks warmed beneath the watchful murmur of the crowd. Duke Rowan Whitcomb stood at the far end of the ballroom, a tall, immovable figure carved from restraint itself. His dark coat, severe and immaculate, suited a man rumored to possess a storm behind his ribs. His gaze swept the assembly with practiced indifference until, for one flickering instant, it collided with hers. She inclined her head with the gentlest courtesy. He returned the gesture with barely perceptible acknowledgement before turning away. Even that slight withdrawal struck her more sharply than a spoken rebuke. Lady Honoria Branford drifted toward her with that feline grace she so enjoyed displaying in moments ripe with opportunity. "My dear Marian," she murmured, voice dipped in honey and sharpened with ice, "how very courageous of you to attend unaccompanied. One does admire perseverance in the face of indifference." Her smile widened at the subtle wince she drew. "His Grace has been preoccupied, I imagine?" "Of course," Marian answered softly. "Affairs of state leave him little leisure." Honoria replied, as though indulging a child's fantasy. "And yet he finds ample time for everything else." With a flutter of silk, she glided away, leaving Marian anchored in place by humiliation she dared not show. A violinist drew a long, aching note that reverberated through her chest. She had loved music once. Now it only reminded her of evenings spent in her chamber, listening to distant footsteps pass her door without pause. Still, she carried herself forward, exchanging polite greetings and measured smiles, though her heart curled inward like parchment near flame. When she turned toward the refreshment table, she heard her name hissed behind a fan, spoken not with admiration but pity. "She sleeps alone, I hear." Not surprised. A duke must have standards. And she, well, she is lovely enough, though hardly remarkable. A hollow ache pressed beneath her ribs. She straightened her shoulders and refused to let her breath falter. Yet when she glimpsed Rowan again, offering his arm to an elderly dowager with unexpected gentleness, something within her twisted. He was capable of warmth. She had seen faint sparks of it in the earliest days of their union, before distance became their unspoken covenant. As the evening waned, Marian slipped from the ballroom unnoticed. The rain struck her skin with refreshing honesty. Rain did not whisper, nor judge, nor measure one's worth. Her carriage carried her back through glistening streets to Harrowmere House, where lamplight glowed faintly against vast stone walls. The household slumbered. Only Mrs. Tamsin Hollowell waited in the corridor, as though anticipating her mistress's bruised return. "You are chilled, my lady," the housekeeper murmured, helping her free her shoulders from the damp shawl. "I am merely tired," Marian replied. The lie sat lightly on her tongue. She had grown accustomed to the taste. In her chamber, the fire waited obediently, though it offered little comfort against the echoing quiet. Marian lowered herself onto the edge of her bed, unfastening her gloves with slow, deliberate motions meant to keep despair from claiming her outright. She had once dared hope their marriage might warm with time. Instead, it had grown frostbitten, each year sealing them deeper into roles neither had chosen with true understanding. She lay back upon the pillows, their coolness welcoming her weary form. Sleep crept faster than she expected, drawing her into its soft net. And then, unexpectedly, she heard her name spoken, not as the world uttered it, clipped and formal, but with a gentleness that trembled through her bones. "Marian?" She turned within the dream, and Rowan stood before her, stripped of distance, of frost, of every guarded veneer he wielded so expertly. His gaze held a tenderness she had not witnessed in waking life, something perilously close to longing. His hand rose, not commanding, not hesitant, but yearning. The warmth of his imagined touch brushed her cheek, and tears she did not understand slipped from the corners of her sleeping eyes. "Marian," he whispered again, voice breaking upon the fragile shore of emotion. Her breath caught. She spoke his name with the desperate solace of one who had hungered too long for a single kindness. "Rowan." A soft gasp escaped her as she woke, tears damp upon her lashes. For a moment she could not discern dream from truth. Then she saw Mrs. Hollowell in the doorway, hand pressed to her chest in startled sympathy, and behind her, half veiled by shadow, stood Rowan himself. He was still dressed from the evening, rain tracing a thin glimmer across his dark hair. His expression, usually a mask of control, had fractured into something raw and shaken. He stared at her as though the world had tilted beneath his feet, as though the sound of his name upon her dreaming lips had undone years of silence. Before Marian could speak, he stepped back into the corridor, leaving only the ghost of his shattered composure lingering in the dim firelight. And with that single wordless retreat, the fault lines beneath their marriage began, at last, to crack open. The morning after the dream unfolded with a deceptive gentleness, as though the house itself sought to soften the memory of what had transpired. Pale winter sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Harrowmere House, scattering quiet patterns across Lady Marian's writing desk. Yet even the delicate glow could not dispel the unease that lingered like a faint bruise upon her spirit. She moved through her chamber carefully, as though afraid any sudden motion would summon the image of Rowan standing stricken in her doorway. The very thought sent warmth to her cheeks, an involuntary confession of longing she had tried for years to bury beneath propriety. A soft knock preceded Mrs. Hollowell's entrance. The housekeeper carried a small velvet-wrapped parcel in her steady hands, her expression unreadable. "This was left upon your desk, my lady," she said, bowing slightly. No note accompanied it. Marian frowned. She had received no gifts since her wedding, and even then, only items chosen for practicality rather than sentiment. She unwrapped the parcel slowly, breath tightening as a small locket emerged, an oval of silver filigree exquisitely wrought, with a single pressed violet sealed beneath glass. The flower had faded to a soft dusk lavender, yet its fragility seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. "It is very beautiful," Mrs. Hollowell murmured. "Yes," Marian whispered, "but I do not know who sent it." The housekeeper hesitated, her brow furrowing as though weighing the prudence of a spoken truth. "There are not many in this household, my lady, who would dare leave a gift so personal." A quiet shiver passed through Marian, though whether it came from hope or dread, she could not say. She closed the locket gently, unwilling to imagine sentiment where none might exist. Later that afternoon, Harrowmere House bustled with unusual energy as the family prepared to attend the Duchess of Wexley's garden gathering, a social obligation Rowan rarely permitted himself to avoid. Marian dressed with uncharacteristic care, selecting a lavender gown that echoed the hue of the mysterious violet. She chastised herself for such sentimentality, yet her gloved fingers lingered upon the fabric as though it carried secret courage. When she descended the staircase, Rowan stood in the entrance hall, fastening his gloves with practiced precision. His gaze flicked to her only briefly, yet in that instant something tightened at the corner of his jaw. Whether it was admiration or discomfort, Marian could not decipher. She offered a quiet greeting. He responded with the barest nod. Silence rose between them like a cold tide. At the garden party, the world bloomed in color and civility. Lanterns swayed gently among the hedges, and roses spilled their perfume into the crisp air. Marian walked alone for only a moment before a familiar voice called her name. "Lady Marian, what a pleasure it is to see you again." Lord Cedric Ashbourne approached, offering a courtly bow. He had been a childhood friend, though the years had given him a more polished elegance and an earnest charm that softened his otherwise striking features. His presence stirred mild scandal merely by existing near her. Society delighted in crafting stories where none had been invited. "You look as though London has not dimmed your kindness," Marian said softly. "Nor has Harrowmere diminished your grace," he replied. The warmth in his tone was friendly, perhaps overly so, but harmless. Still, Marian felt wary. In her precarious position, even innocent conversation could be weaponized. As they strolled along the gravel path, Cedric bent to retrieve her glove when it slipped from her hand, brushing the dust from the delicate stitching before returning it. The gesture lasted scarcely a heartbeat, yet the rustle of parasols behind them signaled the beginning of whispers. Lady Honoria stood a short distance away, observing with serpentine attentiveness. Her eyes gleamed with opportunity, and her lips curved into a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Marian," Honoria called sweetly, approaching with the glide of a woman born to the art of quiet destruction. "How good of Lord Ashbourne to attend to you. His gallantry never fails to draw notice." Cedric straightened, sensing the undercurrent but masking his reaction with a courteous bow. Marian's pulse quickened with dread. Gossip, like smoke, required only the smallest spark. Before she could respond, Rowan appeared behind Honoria, silent as a gathering storm. His eyes took in the scene: Cedric's proximity, Marian's flushed cheeks, Honoria's triumphant expression. The muscle along his jaw hardened as though forged in fire. "Lord Ashbourne," Rowan said with a chilling calm, "it seems you have become quite the attentive companion." Cedric bowed respectfully, though there was a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "Merely offering assistance where it was needed, Your Grace." Rowan's gaze darkened, but his voice remained controlled. "I trust, then, that assistance ends here." Marian felt heat surge through her, shame, indignation, and something dangerously close to hope. She opened her mouth, but Rowan had already turned away, his coat swirling behind him like a banner of restraint stretched to breaking. Cedric offered her an apologetic glance. "I fear I have inadvertently placed you at the heart of a tempest." "No," Marian replied softly. "The tempest existed long before this afternoon." The gathering grew restless with delicious speculation. By evening, the whispers had become a current of scandalous delight, winding their way through drawing rooms and supper tables. Marian returned home with her dignity intact but trembling, knowing the damage had already begun. When she reached her chamber, she discovered the locket placed carefully atop her pillow. Confusion swept through her. She had locked it away before departing, had she not? She stared at the delicate violet as though it might reveal its secrets. Rowan passed her doorway at that moment, pausing just long enough for her to gather courage. "You placed this here?" she asked, voice scarcely above breath. His expression tightened, not with guilt but something deeper, more conflicted. "No," he said softly, though the storm in his eyes betrayed a truth he could not yet speak. She pressed the locket to her chest, heart racing. Something had shifted, dangerously, irrevocably. The walls they had built for years no longer felt solid. Even the silence between them seemed to tremble, as if preparing to break. And somewhere within the house, scandal continued to gather like thunderclouds, waiting for the moment they would be forced to face the truth neither could outrun. Winter announced its authority with a violence that startled even the seasoned servants of Harrowmere House. On a bleak morning in late January, a thunderous crack resounded through the eastern wing, followed by a collapse that sent dust curling through the corridors like startled ghosts. Marian, jolted from her reading, hurried into the hall to find Mrs. Hollowell directing footmen away from shattered beams and splintered plaster. The housekeeper's face bore the unmistakable tension of one caught between fear and duty. "My lady," she said breathlessly, "your chamber has suffered structural damage. It is no longer safe for occupation." Marian felt the familiar sting of misfortune press upon her shoulders, yet she mustered poise. "Then I shall move into one of the guest rooms." Mrs. Hollowell shifted uneasily. "Most are unheated, my lady. Given the frost, the west corridor would be more suitable. His Grace's study and chambers lie that way, but it cannot be helped." The words settled like a tremor in Marian's chest. She offered no protest. What argument could she make that would not reveal more than she dared admit? With composed resignation, she allowed the servants to gather her belongings and escort her to a modest yet warm chamber on Rowan's corridor. The scent of cedar and old books lingered faintly in the air. He favored such tones. Even this detail unraveled some fragile thread within her. For the first day, she avoided crossing paths with him, though his presence infiltrated the silence like a steady heartbeat. She heard him pacing in his study, heard the low murmur of his voice issuing instructions to his steward, heard the soft click of his door at odd hours. Each sound summoned unwelcome reflections of her dream, his whispered tenderness, the warmth of his imagined touch. She struggled to banish these feelings, knowing they were born of yearning, not promise. On the second evening, however, fate abandoned subtlety. As Marian left her chamber with a candle in hand, Rowan stepped into the corridor from his study, the lamplight falling across his face with a severity that seemed carved from marble. For a moment they stood suspended in silence, an expanse of unresolved years stretching between them. "My lady," he said quietly, "I trust you find your accommodation satisfactory." "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, though her pulse betrayed her calm. "I am most grateful for the warmth." He nodded with rigid courtesy, yet his eyes flickered toward her candle, as though registering the slight tremble of her hand. "If you should require anything, you need only ask." "Thank you," she murmured, more softly than intended. She attempted to move past him, but he spoke again, halting her mid-step. "Lady Marian," he said, voice lower, "there is a matter which must be addressed." She felt heat gather beneath her skin. "If this concerns Lord Ashbourne—" "It does not," he interjected, though a shadow passed across his expression. "This concerns the dream." Her breath faltered. Even the wall seemed to pull inward, listening. "I should not have lingered at your doorway that night," he continued, "yet I cannot forget what I heard. You spoke my name as though it were a plea." His throat worked with uncharacteristic emotion. "I must know why." She closed her eyes briefly, summoning courage she had long misplaced. "I dreamt you spoke mine first." He inhaled sharply, and she forced herself to meet his gaze. "In that dream, your grace, there was no distance, no cold propriety. You looked at me with gentleness. I have never heard my name spoken by you in such a manner. When I woke, I could not bear the ache of knowing it was but a dream." The confession hung in the air, fragile as frost. Rowan stepped closer, barely a pace, yet it felt as though he crossed a chasm. "Marian," he said, the name escaping him with a softness that startled them both. "I have wanted to speak to you, truly speak, for longer than I can express. But I feared intrusion. I feared you found my presence burdensome." She stared at him, disbelieving. "Burden? No, your grace. I feared the opposite, that you found mine unworthy of regard." His eyes flashed with something like agony. "Unworthy? You misunderstand entirely." He paused as though wrestling invisible chains. "I admired your quiet strength from the first day I met you. But society's expectations, my own temper, and our ill-constructed beginning created a wall I feared I could not breach without causing harm." A tremor rose in her chest. "Then why did you keep your distance?" "Because," he admitted, voice nearly breaking, "I believed my affection would overwhelm you. I possessed no talent for gentle courtship. I feared you might shrink from the intensity of my regard." The words trembled with sincerity so unguarded it stole her breath. Rowan, distant, formidable Rowan, claimed affection where she had expected only duty. Her voice softened to a whisper. "I never wished for distance. I only wished to know you." He exhaled shakily and extended his hand, not commanding but openly, vulnerably. When his fingers brushed hers, the contact felt consecrated, a moment suspended beyond time. Marian's breath caught, tears gathered unbidden, shimmering in the candlelight. She did not withdraw. Rowan's voice dropped to a reverent murmur. "If I spoke your name with tenderness, my lady, it was not a dream." Her tears spilled, silent and luminous. The corridor seemed to pulse with the force of unspoken promises, years of buried longing rising to the surface like long-buried embers stirring back to flame. For the first time in their marriage, Rowan touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear with a care that shattered any lingering illusion of indifference. She leaned into the touch, scarcely believing the moment was real. Yet before he could say more, footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor, a servant bearing urgent news. Rowan stepped back, not in rejection but necessity, though his eyes remained locked on hers with a rawness that left her trembling. The servant bowed deeply. "Your Grace, Lady Honoria has requested immediate audience. She says it concerns matters of grave importance." Rowan's expression darkened, as though the fragile miracle of their confession faced instant threat. Marian felt dread unfurl within her, cold as winter wind. Their peace had lasted minutes. Scandal waited just beyond the door. And as Rowan turned toward the summons, the truth neither had dared to speak threatened once again to slip beyond their grasp. Rowan strode through the dim corridors with a force that unsettled every candle flame along his path. Marian followed a few steps behind, unable to quell the tremor in her chest. Their fragile moment, so newly born, so astonishingly tender, had been shattered by Lady Honoria's summons. The knowledge sat between them like an unwelcome intruder, threatening to unravel everything they had finally dared to speak aloud. Honoria awaited them in the smaller drawing room, seated with the poise of a woman who believed the world itself bent politely before her whims. She raised her gaze as they entered, offering Rowan a smile that carried the cold precision of a blade. "Your Grace," she said sweetly, "how fortunate you came at once. I feared certain matters had slipped your attention." Rowan's expression hardened. "Speak plainly." "Oh, but I always do," she replied, turning her gaze toward Marian with scarcely veiled disdain. "It seems London grows restless with rumors. Your dear Duchess has become the subject of rather impassioned discussion. Some insist she entertains the attentions of Lord Ashbourne." Marian stiffened. "That is an untruth." Honoria tilted her head like a cat studying cornered prey. Perhaps. But appearances are powerful, my dear. And appearances suggest impropriety. Rowan stepped forward, voice like restrained thunder. You will cease repeating such nonsense. Honoria's smile sharpened. I repeat nothing the city has not already decided. Marian watched Rowan's jaw tighten, fury gathering beneath his composure. Yet she sensed something else, regret, and the realization that silence had allowed this to fester. The thought pierced her. Their distance had been a slow, unintentional cruelty, one she had endured quietly for years. Rowan exhaled sharply. You may leave, Lady Honoria. I am merely concerned for the dignity of Harrowmere, she said with feigned innocence. If you choose to disregard the scandal, I fear the responsibility will rest entirely upon your shoulders. Rowan's voice lowered to a chilling murmur. Leave. Honoria paled, gathered her skirts, and swept from the room, her exit brittle with insult. Silence fell like dust after thunder. Rowan turned to Marian, eyes searching hers with something raw. This must end, he said. The rumors, the distance, all of it. Marian folded her trembling hands before her. I have long wished for it to end. But society does not shift by sentiment. Nor do whispers stop because we ask them to. They will stop because I command them to. She offered him a sad, gentle look. You underestimate their devotion to scandal. No, he stepped closer, lowering his voice to something achingly sincere. I underestimated my devotion to you. The words seemed to echo through the chamber, reshaping the very air around them. Marian's breath trembled as her gaze locked with his. She had waited so long, years marked not by seasons but by silence. Before she could speak, a footman appeared at the door, announcing that the evening's charity assembly awaited their attendance. Rowan dismissed him with a curt nod, then returned his full attention to her. You will accompany me, he said softly. Not as a distant wife. Not as a figure of gossip. As the woman I should have stood beside from the beginning. Her heart surged with a mixture of fear and hope. Rowan, society watches everything. Then let them watch, he said. Let them witness precisely whom I value. Hours later, the assembly hall shimmered beneath hundreds of candles. Silk gowns rustled like whispered secrets, and every eye turned as Rowan entered with Marian on his arm. Not trailing behind him, beside him. Equal in bearing, though the tremor in her fingers betrayed her turmoil. The room fell into a hush that rippled like wind across a field. Whispers began immediately. Is that? They arrived together? He has not presented her in years. Perhaps there is truth in the rumors. Rowan heard them. Marian heard them. Yet Rowan did not release her arm. Instead, he drew her gently forward, positioning her where every gaze could see the quiet radiance of her presence, the strength she had concealed so long beneath humility. A group of matrons approached, faces bent in patronizing sympathy. Your Grace, one began, we had heard. Rowan cut her off with a calm that held unmistakable steel. You have heard lies, he said. My wife is the embodiment of dignity, and no rumor will diminish her. If any man or woman suggests otherwise, they challenge my word. A stunned silence followed. Marian felt her breath catch. This was not the Rowan she had known, yet it was perhaps the Rowan he had always been beneath the armor of distance. He turned slightly, speaking low enough for her alone. I should have done this years ago. Her eyes glistened. And I should have told you I wanted to stand beside you. He lifted her hand with a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation and brushed his lips against her knuckles. Gasps fluttered through the assembly like startled birds. Scandal had transformed into spectacle, and spectacle into revelation. Throughout the evening, Rowan did not leave her side. When conversation grew bold, he tempered it. When glances sharpened, he met them with unwavering certainty. Marian felt something within her shift, a quiet blooming of trust, long denied and now unmistakably real. As they prepared to depart, he leaned close, breath warm against her ear. I have something for you. Her heart quickened. The locket. He nodded. It has belonged to you since our wedding day. I lacked the courage to give it before. Back at Harrowmere House, he retrieved the delicate silver piece from his coat. Marian's breath trembled as he opened it, revealing the pressed violet whose soft hue matched the memory of longing she had carried for so long. I chose it the morning we wed, he said quietly. I feared it too sentimental. I feared you might reject what little tenderness I possessed. She touched the locket with reverence. I never wanted sentiment withheld. He stepped behind her, fastening the chain at her nape with careful fingers. The intimate gesture sent warmth cascading through her entire being. Rowan's voice softened. There is no more distance between us. Not of my choosing. Before she could reply, the front door burst open. A messenger rushed inside, breathless and alarmed. Your Grace, Lady Honoria has circulated a letter through the city. A written accusation against the Duchess. It is everywhere. Marian gasped. Rowan's expression darkened with a fury that shook the air. Their peace had lasted only hours. Now the final confrontation awaited. The moment the breathless messenger delivered his news, the fragile warmth that had blossomed between Rowan and Marian shuddered beneath the weight of fresh betrayal. Rowan's hand, still resting near the locket's clasp at Marian's nape, curled into a fist. The faint trembling of her breath reached him, cutting through fury with a sharper blade. Fear, her fear not of him but of what the city might do to her name. He turned to the messenger with a voice low and lethal. Where is Lady Honoria now? At her town residence, Your Grace. She has made no attempt to conceal her authorship. Of course she has not, Rowan murmured, fury simmering. Cowardice rarely hides when it believes itself victorious. He stepped forward, but Marian moved with him, laying a gentle hand upon his sleeve. Rowan, this letter, what does it claim? He hesitated, as though shielding her from the full cruelty of the words. It implies impropriety with Lord Ashbourne. It suggests you sought comfort outside our marriage. Marian's breath fractured. She dares to accuse me of dishonor when I have lived with nothing but restraint? Rowan's voice softened. She dares because she believes I will not act. She forgets what loyalty means to a Whitcomb. His gaze burned with a fierce vow, and Marian felt a tremor of hope pierce her dread. For years she had only known his silence. Now she saw the iron beneath it. I will accompany you, she whispered. No, his refusal carried no harshness, only protectiveness. Honoria's venom is meant for you. I will not subject you to her spectacle. Wait for me here. Before she could argue, he lifted her hand and pressed it to his heart. One steady beat, then another. I will return with your name restored, he vowed, and with no further shadow standing between us. He left before she could speak further, coat swirling like a dark wing as he strode into the storm-laden night. Marian remained near the fire, hands clasped tightly, the locket warm against her skin. She could feel the tremor of Rowan's promise echoing through her, anchoring her in a way she had never allowed herself to hope. The house was hushed around her, as though all of Harrowmere waited breathlessly for the moment its master reclaimed what had never been lost. His honor and hers entwined with it. Rowan reached Honoria's residence within half an hour, storm winds heaving against the carriage as if nature itself lent strength to his intent. When he entered her drawing room unannounced, Honoria paled, though she feigned composure. Your Grace, she said, rising with forced elegance. How unexpected. I have just been reviewing correspondence, matters of the utmost. Your letter, Rowan interrupted, voice cold enough to halt even her calculated charm. Produce it. She swallowed. The matter required clarification. I believe the public had a right to. The public, he said with quiet devastation, has no right to my wife's name. Honoria faltered. Your Grace, I merely wish to. You wish to wound her. You wish to wound me. Tell me the truth. Which satisfaction pleased you more? Her lips trembled, though she attempted defiance. She attracts sympathy she has not earned. She plays the victim while I am dismissed. Because you behave as a child who covets attention, he said. Marian never sought admiration. She has borne cruelty in silence because dignity is her nature, not a performance. Honoria flushed with embarrassment and rage. Even now you defend her. I will defend her until my last breath. Rowan stepped closer, lowering his voice to a lethal whisper. You will pen a retraction. Every accusation, every insinuation, you will undo them all. Now. Honoria's mask cracked entirely. Panic broke through her expression as she realized she had overplayed her hand. Rowan stood before her not as cousin or peer, but as a duke whose restraint had been pulled past breaking. With shaking hands she sat at her writing desk. Rowan dictated each word, his tone steady and merciless. The retraction was absolute. An admission of her lies, an apology to Marian, and a declaration that Marian had conducted herself with impeccable virtue. When it was finished, Rowan sealed the letter with his signet, ensuring no editor in London would dare refuse publication. As he left, Honoria whispered, You will regret choosing her over. I have regretted choosing distance, he replied, but I will never regret choosing her. He returned to Harrowmere before dawn, boots damp from snow, determination carved along every line of his face. Marian rose the moment he entered the drawing room, relief and fear warring in her gaze. "It is done," Rowan said. "Your name will be restored before the morning papers reach a single doorstep." She pressed a trembling hand to her lips. "How can I thank you?" He approached her slowly, not as a duke but as a man at last freed of chains he had forged himself. "You owe me nothing, Marian. It is I who must ask forgiveness." "For what?" she whispered. "For the years you walked these halls alone. For believing you would shrink from me if I revealed affection. For letting pride build walls I never meant to exist." Her eyes glistened, not with hurt now, but with something luminous. "All I ever wanted was the man you were tonight." He reached for her hand. "And all I ever wanted was the courage to be him." Their silence was not empty, it was full, warm, trembling with possibility. Rowan lifted her hand slowly, reverently, as though she were a sacred vow. "If you speak my name again," he murmured, echoing the dream that had awakened them both, "let it not be in sorrow. Let it be in choice." She stepped closer, breath mingling with his. "Then hear me now, Rowan." Her voice broke on the gentle weight of his name, a confession and a promise together. He drew her into his arms, not with hurried passion, but with deep, assured tenderness. Marian felt the years of distance melt like frost beneath sunrise. Every quiet ache, every lonely night, every wish she had buried, they all found their answer in that single embrace. Later, as dawn cast gold across the corridor where two doors had once stood as barriers, Rowan reached for the handle of her chamber, then released it. Instead he opened the door to his own, and Marian followed him inside. The narrator's final murmur lingered like a warm breath upon the morning air. In a house once divided by silence, two hearts at last chose to speak.